So welcome everybody. My name is Francois Lascelles. I'm the Director of Layer 7's Solutions Engineering. And presenting with me today is Peter Gibbles, Product Management at HP Software, ALM SOA. So today's webinar topic is Service Governance 2.0. And what we're going to talk about is how service governance is required by the enterprise when assets get distributed across different service zones, how you can combine best-of-breed runtime and design time governance solutions to enhance cloud adoption and get better integration in general. We'll look at the integration between HP Systinet, HP Back, and the Layer 7 gateway, and we'll talk about specific governance patterns. So if time allows for it, we'll also take some questions at the end. You should be able to type your questions into the WebEx chat panel. You can also use the hashtag displayed here to add your comments in real time on Twitter if you want. And if you're not finding the answers to what you're looking for today, please feel free to contact us afterwards. You will find additional links at the last slide. So first, let's examine some characteristics of today's enterprise SOA and how it relates to cloud, mobile, and things like that. So first of all, most large enterprises, governments today have what I would refer to as a partial cloud adoption. So partial not only because it is gradual, but also because not all data belongs on a public cloud, for example. So there continues to be enterprise IT assets that stay on-premise. Often this includes sensitive data and mission-critical application, identity authorities, for example, and also legacy assets that are not practical to move to cloud. This said, the enterprise is increasingly deploying services on public cloud type settings, and the enterprise subscribes to software as a service solution type, so they have their own instances running on the cloud, and those also become public cloud side services that can actually be consumed. So in the end, your IT assets still need to be integrated today in 2011 just as much as back in the day when all these IT assets were hosted inside your own domain. But nowadays, you have to worry about integration mechanisms that cross domains, across different providers. These providers may even compete with one another and not want to necessarily facilitate this type of integration. So this partial or gradual cloud adoption does create additional governance and integration challenges. And this effect is only compounded by the fact that there is an increasing pressure for external consumption of existing data. You integrate with partners. You're potentially finding yourself acting as a service provider, whether you like it or not. You need to expose APIs to partners, maybe even consumers. Those API consumers are increasingly mobile, so service orientation in general and service governance are principles that help you get there. So as a service provider, what are some of the requirements that you have around governance? Well, an obvious one is that you need to be able to centrally govern services that end up being distributed across various zones. The concept of service zone is something that can represent both identity domains or on-premise, off-premise. Typically, this has both a network aspect as well as an administrative aspect to it. And in order to respond to changing requirements, which is one of the most important goals of an SOA, you need to be able to act on a contractual level. You need some sort of contract enforcement. So the provisioning of rules needs to be automated in order to restore agility. So obviously, whenever transactions potentially cross domains, you must provide security in general and especially identity federation. You want to be able to map trust based on your contract design in order to achieve this flexible security. You need to decouple security implementation and service implementation. And this is especially the case when services can be moved between service zones. Finally, another implication of finding yourself in the shoes of a service provider is that you need to be able to monitor quality of service. You may have your own contractual obligations, and you need to be aware of how you're doing regarding this. You also want to monitor the quality of service for the services that you consume, either directly or indirectly. And if you have services hosted off-premise that consume third-party services that you subscribe to, how do you get alerted, for example, when those third-party violate SLA? So here I'm just going to pass control to Peter Gibbles for the next slide. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Francois. Yeah, as you can see, there are many challenges along a life cycle, and a lot that happens in design time and in runtime, and questions, how can you synchronize information along the life cycles here. Typical requirements there are to solve the gap between operations and design, means information that you have in design. Can you structure this? Can you hand it over to other people that are involved in one or the other way, be it for testing or be it for the operation side? Can you store information in a centralized repository, including history information, which is very important for change management? So version control is a key there. There's also lots of operation information that can be defined during the design, but it's very often missing on the operation side. So if there's a handover of this information, that would also help proactively people on the operation side. When you look at the design governance, design time governance on the left side of this picture here, there are policies that can be defined in the design time. Policies can be enforced in design time to assure a consistent design, and also that design can be handed over to operations later. You can attach SLO planning, and then basically, as I mentioned, you can hand over information to the runtime environment. And for example, for the policy enforcement, and we come to that, capabilities also with layer 7 here. And then also for service level agreement, service level monitoring. And what is also quite important is if there's anything on the production side that you are not aware of in your, and you don't have information on your central repository, then you want to know this. So basically, to identify rogue artifacts is also a mandatory requirement. Yeah, let's go to the next slide and talk about governance across different service zones. So basically, as you see here, you can have many different domains with different application components in it, different consumer and providing applications, and layer 7 devices, for example, could be spread across those domains, and there is basically a requirement to have a center control, a center deployment in a consistent way. So basically using the centralized design time governance authority and to define access control rules and the contracts that also Francois mentioned. And then basically a need to define, for example, runtime policies with layer 7 tools, but then store them in central location on the HP SOA Systinet side, and then deploy appropriate policies only to appropriate domains and services with appropriate needs. Yeah, layer 7 gateways, and I guess Francois will talk about that later, can be deployed in public cloud, in private cloud, or on-premise devices or situations. And cross-domain trust is handled at the perimeter side. Yeah, a little bit about the HP SOA Systinet. If you're not familiar with that, basically there are a lot of challenges on the governance side, and with the SOA Systinet, please step forward, Francois. You see on the right-hand side, we are able to basically facilitate distributed collaboration. This allows also organizations to lower the costs, agree on policies for service development and in advance, and also reuse whatever you have, the service, the components, and basically you can also isolate critical information. Sensitive information can be partitioned into domains. You can address security concerns, and everybody is basically sharing a shared repository. And so basically features provided by Systinet are basically lifecycle management for modern application, business process, and their components. Quite important there is really to understand what components make up the application and processes, track the life cycle for the individual components, as well as application processes, then promote component reuse, give visibility to all components that are used and that you can reuse or that teams can reuse before they reinvent something that is already there. Identify impact of changes. So imagine you want to change a service in an application landscape. What is the impact? So you need to get information about that, which Systinet can provide. Yeah, and then consistent and collaboration during planning and development. And what is very important as well is automate policy compliance as much as you can. And so we have ways in Systinet to basically automatically basically run policies in the various situations. So now I hand it over to Francois.
Thanks, Peter. So that was the HP Systinet. Now, the core component of the Layer 7 solution is the Layer 7 gateway. And the Layer 7 gateway is a component that is inline of the transaction, processing traffic flowing between service requesters and service endpoints. And it acts as the policy enforcement point. So that this policy enforcement point will perform authentication and authorization on behalf of the service endpoint. The policies that are enforced reflect the contracts defined in the Systinet environment. Our gateway supports all the relevant security standards to do authentication and ensure message integrity, for example. So this is a drop-in solution for all of the web service security standards, for example. This will also assume all of the identity federation requirements. It will both validate tokens or issue tokens as a security token service. So it is also acting as a security token service, which is deployed at the perimeter, like we saw in the previous slide. We'll get into this a little bit later in more detail. So this gateway will also enforce SLAs at runtime. This will include things like hard quotas, as well as monitoring response times for both services protected by the gateway, but also services outside of the protected zone. The gateway will issue alerts based on the policy configuration. The gateway will also inspect traffic. It will classify messages and make sure that it's all formatted as it expected by the protected services. The gateway will also provide, XML firewalling, full threat protection, protection against message level threats as well as network level. And finally, this gateway will accelerate transactions through specialized hardware and software components. So this gateway is available as a hardware appliance, and it's also available as a virtual appliance. So this virtual appliance form factor is something that is available, for example, for VMware. So we're a certified VMware solution. We're also available to be deployed on public cloud solutions. For example, on Amazon, if you go today on AWS, you'll see that the Layer 7 gateway is actually on the Amazon catalog. So when we're talking about, putting a gateway, a policy enforcement point at the perimeter of a service zone that is in a public cloud, this could be something that you use, from the Amazon catalog directly. I pass this back to Peter here for the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Francois. And I mentioned before the governance side with HP SOA Systinet, and Francois mentioned that there's a lot of information also in the gateway itself. And so on the monitoring side or on the management side, you see here on the slide just an extract from an architectural overview diagram of one view into HP's business technology optimization stack on the operations side. We are mainly mentioning here a Business Availability Center, BAC, as this has a tight integration also with HP SOA Systinet, and can be nicely integrated with Layer 7, and I'll show that later. These components are really important to do end-to-end performance, application, and health checks. As I mentioned, they leverage information that comes along also from the Layer 7 gateways, and then it can correlate all that information. It stores also discovered artifacts and the relations and properties into a UCMDB, and it can really monitor on all required levels, really from the bottom of infrastructure components up to the actual source services, for example, or transactions that are running. It offers out-of-the-box customizable 360 degrees dashboard, and basically, as I mentioned, via the UCMDB and other mechanisms, we have synchronization mechanisms to feed information from runtime back into the SOA governance solution.
Thanks, Peter. So we just introduced to you, the three main components, HP Systinet, HP BAC, and the Layer 7 gateway. Now, let's take a look at how all of this infrastructure interacts together. So first, the Layer 7 Systinet integration. So we illustrated here something named the Layer 7 Policy Manager there on the right side. This is the design time policy editing tool that ships with the Layer 7 gateway appliance. So it's a rich GUI that lets architects or administrators model their specific policies. It's got a very sophisticated policy definition GUI. And these are the policies that are then interpreted and enforced at runtime by a Layer 7 gateway. So first, at design time, you would use the Layer 7 Policy Manager to create, to author and model those policies, and you would import that in the HP Systinet as metadata, which can then be associated afterwards with the services defined in the HP Systinet. So Systinet can be used, if you want, as the repository for Layer 7 gateway policies, and these policies are then referenced by Systinet at design time. So the provisioning of the services and policies between Systinet and Layer 7 can actually be driven from both components. Using the Layer 7 Management API, for example, HP Systinet can automate the provisioning of all service metadata to the Layer 7 gateway. And you can tie this with the provisioning automation to the service lifecycle concept of Systinet's governance solution. So that's at design time. And at runtime, information relating to traffic handled by the gateway, like metrics or any transactional information, can be fed into HP back. That's when HP back comes in. And notice how the only component which is in line with the transaction is the Layer 7 gateway. And the reason for this is form factor. The Layer 7 gateway, with its hardening and acceleration, will avoid introducing any added latency, and in fact will protect the backend services as well. But also, by delegating all of this policy enforcement from the backend services to the infrastructure, you get back the agility that you need to restore the agility in your enterprise SOA. Back to Peter.
Thanks, Francois. Here you see basically our Systinet 4, which is the current version, functional components, and basically how we integrate with the Layer 7 policy enforcement points. And basically, we have a modular approach on the Systinet side, and there are various important components. In the middle, you see the metadata repository. This is the central repository. As I said, that contains all information that is coming from various sources, auto-discovered or manually put in or programmatic, whatever. And this information is shared to various people. So we have a role-based model, very nice GUIs, but also access via REST interfaces or mail or whatever you can think about. There is a component that is the registry, so it's a UDDI compliant service registry, and you can have many of those, and these registries can be deployed throughout the landscape, and it's the main connection point also to the Layer 7 technology. Central Catalog basically provides information about all kinds of artifacts that you have stored in the repository, and so you can search and browse there and can see, if you can reuse certain service elements or services, and then basically you can request to use it. A very important component is lifecycle management. Lifecycle management really assures that you do not forget anything. So basically, from when a service gets born till it's deployed or depreciated, lifecycle controls all this, and it gets additional basically support via policy framework. As we mentioned before, policies for design and runtime can be stored and handled there. I will come back to Visual Navigator. This is a nice navigation tool where you can see all kind of information in a graphical way. And then, as Francois also mentioned, contracts are very key here, and the SLOs attached to it. So basically, what you would do for a certain service is, ideally, you would sign a contract and you agree on SLOs, and then basically a deployment based on the contract information would start. What we also see quite often, and that's why Systinet has a lot of open interfaces, but also we have plugins for specific IDEs, like Eclipse plugin, for example, where you can directly leverage as a developer information that is stored in Systinet without having Systinet front-end access. With the Workbench component, we can customize Systinet according to customer-specific needs. And then there are also other integrations, for example, to our service test management suite, that is out-of-the-box functionality to hand over to test people, and then once tests are successfully done, basically you allow the handover into production, and then as said, the Layer 7 gets into the game here, and the monitoring with the Business Availability Center. Yeah, on the next slide, I would like to show you a high level into our lifecycle management environment. This is a very powerful environment, and there are ways to graphically design your life cycles that you need. But you can also take out of the box predefined life cycles and just enrich them and add specific behavior to the life cycle. When you design a life cycle, you do that in a graphical way, and then you can also define who should be able to basically leverage such a life cycle, and you can also define if in the various phases and the various stages there, if there is a manual handover or if there's an automatic handover, if there are approvals required or not, to really assure your quality of services. On the next slide, you see that in a little more detail. So here, for example, you see highlighted the testing phase, and you see tasks. So basically, you can specify tasks that have to be done either automatically or by people. And you see here, you can assign tasks to people. So you can say, you know, there has to be an export to registry. This is controlled by QA engineers. You have functional testing, QA engineers, and so on. And so you can imagine you could add specific tasks, and typically this is done centrally, these definitions, and then most of the people who would use Systinet would simply consume these definitions. Yeah, in the policy section, you would add design and runtime policies that are coming from the layer 7 environment, and you would also specify approvers, so who should approve before you allow that something moves to the next stage. And as I mentioned before, you could also create automatic actions. Automatic actions could be, for example, you want to deploy information to a layer 7 gateway in a certain step. Or you want to, you know, deploy this only to your test environment, because you see here at the moment I'm in the test phase. And then once everything is tested, you would basically move information to the production phase, and you would maybe redeploy. You want to redeploy also information to the layer 7 gateways that you have connected to the productive environment. Yeah, let's talk about visualizing. Here you see visualizing applications. This is a quite powerful tool that we have added to Systinet, and you can define how you would like to see information. If you would like to see that in a more layered way, and also the granularity. Some people might only want to see, you know, a certain service, to what application is that service attached, or you want to see, you know, who's using that service. So you could click on a service, then you can ask the user interface here, who's using this? Or you want to do a change impact analysis. So you want to say, okay, if I change the ATM backend service, who's impacted? So basically this nice front end that creates automatically and dynamically always the views you want in real time, and it would also highlight relations using different colors that can be for sure predefined. And so basically you can also from here jump, if you like this as a front end, you can from here jump into the various areas of the Systinet tool set to get much more information that is basically behind the graphic here. So let's talk about how we integrate, for example, layer 7 gateways, or how it can be integrated with our business availability center. One easy way to do this is basically to attach, as you see here, an SNMP policy, a trap one, on the layer 7 gateway device. And this then basically sends alert information out. And here at the bottom on this picture, you basically see HP SiteScope, which is one of our powerful monitoring environments, part of the BAC framework. And this SiteScope gets all kind of alerts, and then, as you can imagine, it can feed this also to correlation engines, and you can correlate these alerts, you can prioritize them, you could then forward this to service manager and automatically create incidents if there's a serious event coming from the layer 7 side, for example, that impacts a certain team or certain application or business process. And then basically you send that information to the appropriate people. Another interesting area is performance. So layer 7, and we see that on the next slide, collects a lot of performance metrics. So basically in the appliance you have these metrics, and again also here you want to correlate that information with information that you have outside layer 7. And so within the HP Business Availability Center and surrounding products, we have different ways to gather information. Here is shown on the left-hand side, there are metrics that are basically collected inside layer 7 and then hand over to, as we show in this example, to HP SiteScope. There are various metrics like number of requests or failed attempt or service time or average response time or whatever. There are many features that layer 7 has here. And this information is then fed into business availability dashboards, and then there you can basically highlight that information in a graphical format, and then also store some information back into the Systinet repository. Yeah, with that I hand over to Francois again.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So earlier Peter was talking about the concept of service governance across service zones. So when you implement service governance for entities that are hosted in the cloud, for example, you have this requirement to control and enable trust between those different zones, these different zones of services. So this is something that is enabled by your policy enforcement point acting at the perimeter of the zone itself. And this ability is something that is built into the layer 7 gateway. So concretely, what this means is that when a service inside of a particular zone needs to interact with a service in another zone, and this is what I illustrate above here, the request leaving the zone of origin is going through the policy enforcement point, which will append, if you want, a token on behalf of the in-zone requester. So this token is digitally signed, and it could be trusted on the receiving end if that zone is configured to accept that. And on the receiving end, and this is what I illustrated at the bottom there, the policy enforcement point will be able to validate incoming tokens coming from external sources and will either authorize or deny access to a service based on that token. So at that point, the policy enforcement point validates federated trust policies on behalf of the services in the zone itself. And this is how you enable cross-domain identity federation with our gateway. We support the standards-based token formats, so you can use that to issue or validate SAML-based tokens or OAuth tokens, for example. You can also use the gateway to interpret proprietary token formats, and this is something that's important. It often comes up when interacting with external entities, when those are partners or software as a service type solutions. If they have their own proprietary token formats, you need the flexibility in your infrastructure to be able to interpret those tokens. But also in some situations, issue tokens in a proprietary format that are expected on the other side in another service zone. So this was about cross-domain identity federation with layer 7. So we're getting to the end here. Last slide. Back to Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Francois. Yeah, here on the last slide, you see everything coming together. So from design time governance to runtime governance, and you can have many of layer 7 devices, software connected into the various domains or application landscapes whatsoever. As said, it's quite critical to pass over information that you have already in design time to the various endpoints and let the appropriate proxies create, and then you turn everything into operation, while at the same time you monitor the behavior of the services and you highlight violations. And so there's really a closed loop required. And we are moving forward. We are really eager to increase also the integration with our partner layer 7 from the HP side.
Thanks, Peter. So I'll just display the last slide here, where you have the web addresses here. The other thing, so this concludes the presentation part of the webinar. Now, at this point, you should be able to use your chat panel in WebEx here. If you want to submit a question, now would be the right time to do that. I'm looking if anything is coming up here. So I've got a question here. Does cloud providers allow clients to install their own hardware, such as layer 7 device? Now, this is a good question. So obviously, when you talk about cloud providers and cloud-based solutions, you're avoiding tying a solution to a specific hardware platform. And that's why one of the things I was describing when I talked about layer 7 gateways, the fact that this is available as a hardware appliance, but it's also available as a virtual appliance. And virtual appliances is the form factor that is increasingly relevant to the enterprise, not only for public cloud deployments, but also, and very importantly, for private cloud deployments. So the virtual appliance basically is a virtual image of the hardware appliance itself. So you get full binary compatibility, you still get the hardening, you still get some acceleration, but obviously not in the hardware anymore, but you still get an accelerator processing of the messages. So for example, if you go to an Amazon deployment where you have services there, you can go to the Amazon catalog and instantiate directly from there our virtual appliance that is formatted for that platform. And you would have the same thing in your private cloud. You would have the same thing in any other service zone. So when you talk about cloud, typically you talk about virtual appliances for those particular zones. I'm looking for other questions here. So here I've got something. Could you explain to me what are examples of policies that companies would set in Systinet to manage their services? So one of the things that we talked about is the concept of authoring the policy using the layer 7 policy manager and importing this policy as an asset within Systinet. And at that point, in Systinet, you have policy assets which you can then associate with services at runtime that are deployed on our layer 7 gateway. So typical example of what we would do as part of these policies is do things like authorization rules, so access control based on identity, based on network location, based on considering message level patterns and tying those with attributes of identities, for example. Other things that our policy language would typically define is things like quotas. So if you have this attribute, you should only be allowed to consume a service no more than, let's say, 100 times per hour or something like that. So quotas. You would also, in your policy, you would add instructions that populate metrics, for example, to back, or you would capture some specific information that's relevant to you and things like that. I'm looking for other questions here.
Yeah, there's a question. This is very generic. How Systinet compares to solutions from IBM, Oracle, and others. Yeah, we are very competitive with HP SOA Systinet, and we have all integrations or features that other vendors have as well. But we leverage a very strong partnership here with Layer 7 and the complete HP BTO suite, which has integrations, as I mentioned before, into our application lifecycle management, the handover to our cloud solutions, and so on. So it's Systinet is a very powerful tool in itself. Combined with Layer 7, it provides an excellent governance solution, but it also has additional integrations to other very powerful tools to leverage basically information once it's in the Systinet repository.
Okay, so I think this is all the time that we had. I really encourage you to contact us if you have any additional questions. You can get through to us from one of those URLs that are displayed here on the screen. So feel free to contact us. We'll connect you to the right people to answer your questions. If you want to have, if you want to see a demo of something like that, or if you have questions about your own personal use cases that you're looking solutions for, please reach out to us. And thank you very much for joining this webinar.